Have you ever looked at someone and instantly thought, they must be wealthy? Maybe it was the house, the car, or the clothes. Somehow your brain decided their financial story before they ever spoke a single word. It happens so naturally that we rarely question it. We assume wealth should be visible, obvious, almost impossible to hide. If someone has money, surely there must be signs that everyone can see. But what if the people who appear wealthy aren't actually wealthy at all? And what if the people who have quietly built real wealth are the ones most of us walk past every single day? That possibility feels almost backwards. After all, we've spent our entire lives being taught that success should stand out. Bigger homes, newer cars, expensive vacations, those have become our definition of financial success. Ethan believed the same thing. Every morning he drove past a beautiful neighborhood filled with luxury cars and perfectly landscaped homes. To him, it looked like the place where wealthy people lived. One house always caught his attention. Luxury SUVs filled the driveway, packages arrived almost daily, and every holiday seemed to include another expensive trip. From the outside, everything looked exactly how wealth was supposed to look. Just a few streets away lived an older man named Samuel. His home was modest. His truck was nearly 20 years old. His clothes were simple. Ethan never imagined the two families belonged in the same financial conversation. Without realizing it, Ethan had done what most of us do. He judged wealth using visible evidence. He never asked what couldn't be seen, because our minds naturally trust what our eyes notice first. Then one afternoon, the illusion cracked. Neighbors quietly mentioned that the family in the beautiful house was months behind on payments. The vacations, the luxury cars, and the lifestyle had been financed almost entirely by debt. Ethan could hardly believe it. The people he admired weren't living from wealth. They were living from borrowed money. Suddenly, everything he thought he recognized about financial success began to feel uncertain. A few days later, Samuel invited Ethan over for coffee. The house looked exactly as it always had, simple, quiet, and ordinary. Nothing inside suggested extraordinary wealth. In fact, it looked surprisingly average. During their conversation, Samuel casually mentioned he had retired years earlier. His investments covered his living expenses, his home had been paid off for decades, and he no longer needed to work unless he genuinely wanted to. Ethan looked around the room again. Nothing had changed. The furniture was old, the walls were plain. Yet for the first time, he realized he might be sitting inside the wealthiest home he'd ever visited. Driving home, one question refused to leave his mind. If real wealth could hide behind such an ordinary life, then what had he been recognizing all these years? And how many other people had he misunderstood? Maybe wealth wasn't difficult to build because it was difficult to earn. Maybe it was difficult to recognize because most of us had spent our lives looking for it in exactly the wrong places. Before we continue, welcome to Lyon Invests. This channel isn't about getting rich overnight. It's about questioning the financial beliefs that quietly shape how we earn, spend, save, invest, and build wealth. Many of the ideas we've accepted about money sound true, until we take a closer look. Once you understand the hidden patterns behind financial decisions, you begin seeing money differently. If that's the kind of thinking you're looking for, I'd love to have you subscribe. One quick note before we continue. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm simply passionate about researching financial psychology, behavioral economics, investing, and the beliefs that shape how people think about money. Everything shared here is for educational purposes. Now, let's return to Ethan's question. If the obvious signs of wealth can be completely misleading, then what invisible signals are we missing every single day without even realizing it? The first clue is surprisingly simple. Most people don't actually recognize wealth. They recognize spending. Those aren't the same thing, but our brains often treat them as if they were identical. Imagine standing on a busy street. One person walks by wearing a designer suit and a luxury watch. Another wears faded jeans and carries a worn backpack. Which one would your mind quietly label as wealthy? Psychologists have long understood that the human brain relies on shortcuts to make quick decisions. Visible status symbols become mental evidence, even when they reveal almost nothing about someone's actual financial position. The strange part is that genuine wealth doesn't need to announce itself. Ownership, investments, and financial freedom don't create much to look at. They're powerful precisely because they exist where most people never think to look. That's why debt can imitate wealth so convincingly. It can purchase the appearance of success almost overnight. Real wealth usually takes years to build, and when it finally arrives, it often remains surprisingly quiet. The more Ethan thought about it, the more unsettling the realization became. Perhaps the greatest illusion about money isn't believing wealth is rare. It's believing wealth always looks wealthy. Ethan couldn't stop replaying the two homes in his mind. One looked like success, but depended on tomorrow's paycheck. The other looked ordinary, yet every bill had already been paid by decisions made years ago. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't luck either. Both families earned good incomes at different points in their lives. Yet somewhere along the way, they started playing completely different financial games. Most people believe wealth begins when income becomes large enough. It sounds reasonable because income is easy to measure. Every paycheck feels like visible proof that you're moving closer to financial freedom. But if that were completely true, then the highest earners would always become the wealthiest people. Reality tells a different story. High income creates opportunity, but it doesn't guarantee lasting wealth. Imagine planting two identical trees. One spends all its energy growing bigger branches that everyone can admire. The other quietly grows deeper roots. At first, the first tree looks far more impressive. Years later, a powerful storm arrives. The tree with the larger branches struggles to stay upright. The one with deeper roots barely moves. Real strength had been growing where nobody was looking. Money works in much the same way. Visible spending creates impressive branches. Quiet ownership builds roots. The problem is that our eyes naturally celebrate what grows above the surface instead of what keeps everything standing. Samuel understood something Ethan had never considered. Every dollar spent trying to look wealthy was one less dollar quietly working toward becoming wealthy. That trade-off wasn't obvious at first, but it changed everything over time. He wasn't against enjoying life. He traveled, spent time with family, and bought things that genuinely mattered to him. The difference was that he never spent money simply to convince other people he was successful. That sounded simple, yet Ethan realized how often people make financial decisions with invisible audiences in mind. Sometimes we aren't buying things because we need them. We're buying the feeling of being seen differently. Think about the last major purchase you admired. Was it because it truly improved someone's life? Or was it because everyone else immediately noticed it? Those aren't always the same reason, even if they feel similar. Behavioral economists often describe humans as deeply influenced by social signals. We constantly compare ourselves with the people around us, even when we don't realize we're doing it. Those comparisons quietly shape our financial choices. The challenge is that comparison has no finish line. Every neighborhood has a larger house. Every car has a more expensive version. Every achievement quickly becomes someone else's starting point. Samuel smiled when Ethan mentioned this. If your goal is to impress everyone, he said, you'll always find someone whose approval costs more than you can afford. That sentence lingered in Ethan's mind. Maybe wealth becomes difficult to recognize because so many people confuse admiration with freedom. One depends on other people's opinions. The other depends on your own financial reality. Imagine two people earning exactly the same salary. One spends nearly everything maintaining an impressive lifestyle. The other quietly buys assets that continue producing value long after the paycheck has been spent. From the outside, the first person often appears more successful. Their purchases create visible proof that everyone can admire. The second person's progress happens quietly, hidden inside investments, savings, and ownership that attract almost no attention. That's the strange irony. The things that make someone look wealthy are often designed to be seen. The things that actually create wealth are usually designed to grow without anyone noticing. This is why genuine wealth often feels invisible. It doesn't need applause. A paid-off home doesn't announce itself. A growing investment account doesn't park itself in the driveway. Financial freedom rarely creates dramatic visual evidence. Ethan began noticing things he'd overlooked for years. The people who seemed the calmest about money weren't always earning the most. They simply weren't relying on appearances to measure their financial progress. For them, success wasn't another expensive purchase. Success was knowing that an unexpected bill wouldn't create panic. Success was having choices tomorrow because they had been willing to sacrifice attention today. That perspective challenged almost everything Ethan believed growing up. He had been taught to recognize success through visible milestones. Nobody had ever taught him to recognize quiet stability as a form of wealth. The more he reflected, the more he realized our culture rarely celebrates invisible victories. Paying off debt isn't exciting to watch. Building an investment portfolio isn't dramatic. Patience rarely becomes a headline. Yet those quiet decisions often shape someone's financial future far more than the purchases everyone notices. The strongest foundations are almost always built long before anyone sees the finished house. Ethan finally understood why wealth is so difficult to recognize. We've trained ourselves to look at the surface, while real wealth spends most of its life growing underneath it. That realization led Ethan to an even bigger question. If real wealth grows beneath the surface, why do so many intelligent people spend their lives chasing the part everyone else can see? The answer wasn't simply greed. It wasn't because people were irresponsible or bad with money. The truth was far more human. We naturally seek visible proof that we're making progress. Think about exercising. You don't notice stronger bones or a healthier heart. You notice smaller clothes and bigger muscles because those changes are easy to see. Money follows a surprisingly similar pattern. Financial progress often begins with invisible changes. A growing investment account, a shrinking mortgage, or years of consistent saving don't attract much attention, even though they quietly transform someone's future. Because those victories are invisible, they rarely feel exciting. Buying something new creates immediate emotion. Building wealth often feels almost boring, especially during the early years when the results seem painfully small. Samuel once told Ethan, "The hardest part about building wealth isn't the math. It's believing something invisible is becoming valuable before anyone else can see it." That sentence explained something Ethan had never understood. Most people quit long before wealth becomes noticeable because they mistake a lack of visible progress for a lack of real progress. Imagine planting an oak tree. For years, it appears to grow slowly. Day after day, it hardly looks different. But beneath the soil, an enormous root system is quietly spreading in every direction. No one applauds those roots because no one can see them. Yet without them, the tree could never become tall enough to survive the storms that eventually arrive. Real wealth grows the same way. Long before anyone notices financial freedom, years of patient decisions have already created the foundation supporting it. The visible result always arrives long after the invisible work. This helps explain another strange pattern. Truly wealthy people often seem remarkably patient. They're not waiting because they enjoy delays. They're waiting because they understand how compounding quietly rewards consistency over excitement. Compounding is difficult to appreciate because our brains naturally focus on immediate rewards. Waiting years for a larger outcome feels emotionally harder than enjoying a smaller reward right now. Behavioral economists call this present bias. We consistently overvalue today's pleasure while undervaluing tomorrow's opportunity, even when tomorrow's reward is dramatically larger. That doesn't make us irrational. It makes us human. Our brains evolved to solve immediate problems, not to celebrate invisible financial progress that may take decades to fully reveal itself. Ethan began wondering whether society accidentally reinforces this habit. Every advertisement celebrates consumption. Every luxury purchase receives attention. Very few people congratulate someone for quietly increasing their net worth. Success becomes easier to display than to measure. A luxury car communicates instantly. Financial independence doesn't. One is obvious the moment it appears. The other often remains hidden for years. That's why wealth is so easy to misunderstand. We've confused visible signals with meaningful signals. One tells a story about spending. The other tells a story about ownership, patience, and freedom. Samuel admitted there were years when even he questioned his own approach. Friends upgraded homes, bought expensive vehicles, and seemed to move ahead faster. For a while, he wondered if he was falling behind. Then, something unexpected happened. Economic uncertainty arrived. Businesses slowed. Jobs disappeared. Markets became unpredictable. Suddenly, the people with the loudest lifestyles faced the quietest fears. Samuel wasn't immune to uncertainty, but he wasn't controlled by it either. His years of patient decisions had purchased something no luxury item ever could: time to think instead of panic. That was the first moment Ethan truly understood what wealth had been buying all along. It wasn't just comfort. It wasn't status. It was resilience when life refused to go according to plan. Perhaps that's why real wealth often looks so ordinary. It doesn't spend every dollar proving it exists. Instead, it quietly prepares for moments that nobody hopes will ever arrive. When people imagine wealth, they often picture what someone owns. Rarely do they picture what someone no longer has to worry about. Yet, that invisible absence may be wealth's greatest advantage. Freedom from constant financial anxiety can't be photographed. Peace of mind doesn't appear in a driveway. The ability to say no without fear leaves almost no visible evidence for other people to admire. Ethan realized he'd spent years searching for wealth with his eyes, when perhaps it had always been something better recognized through the quiet choices people were free to make. From that day forward, Ethan noticed something he had overlooked for years. The people who quietly built wealth didn't seem obsessed with looking successful. They seemed obsessed with protecting their freedom. They rarely asked, "Can I afford this?" Instead, they asked a different question. What will this decision cost me 5 or 10 years from now? That single habit quietly changed almost everything. Most purchases have two prices. There's the amount you pay today, and there's the future those dollars could have created if they had remained invested. One price is visible. The other is almost invisible. Imagine picking a single apple from a young tree. It doesn't seem important. But if that apple held the seeds for an entire orchard, the true cost was never just one piece of fruit. Money works in much the same way. Every dollar has the potential to become something larger. Wealthy people learn to notice that hidden potential long before anyone else sees the results. That doesn't mean they never spend money. They absolutely do. The difference is that they understand the trade-off. Every dollar spent today is a dollar that can no longer quietly build tomorrow. For Ethan, this changed the meaning of wealth completely. He had always believed wealth was measured by what people owned. Now he began to see it was also measured by the opportunities they chose not to sacrifice. He remembered all the times he had admired someone's lifestyle without asking what it required to maintain. Looking successful and remaining financially secure weren't always traveling in the same direction. That's why appearances can be so persuasive. We witness the reward, but rarely see the responsibility attached to it. We notice the purchase, not the payments. We admire the result without knowing the story behind it. Real wealth often refuses to compete in that game. It doesn't need constant proof because its greatest reward isn't attention. Its greatest reward is having more choices when life inevitably changes. Think about two people standing on the same mountain. One climbs higher to be seen by everyone below. The other climbs to see farther into the distance. They reach the summit for completely different reasons. Money works the same way. One person uses it to create an image. The other uses it to create options. From the outside, those paths may look similar at first, but they lead to very different lives. Perhaps that's why genuine wealth feels so quiet. It spends less energy announcing itself, and more energy protecting the freedom it has already created. Silence isn't the absence of success. Sometimes it's evidence of it. Ethan began noticing ordinary people in a new way. The retired couple walking every afternoon. The small business owner who never chased luxury. The neighbor whose modest home had quietly been paid off years ago. None of them looked extraordinary. Yet each possessed something advertisements could never sell, a life with fewer financial obligations and more control over how tomorrow would unfold. It made Ethan wonder how many truly wealthy people he had passed without ever recognizing them. Not because they were hiding, but because he had been searching for the wrong signals all along. The world constantly teaches us to notice what's loud, bigger, newer, more expensive, but wealth doesn't always speak loudly. More often, it whispers through patience, discipline, and choices that attract very little attention. That's why recognizing wealth is harder than recognizing spending. Spending creates a performance. Wealth creates a foundation. One is designed to be seen. The other is designed to last. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. Many people spend years trying to look wealthy before becoming wealthy, while those who eventually become wealthy often stop caring whether anyone notices at all. The more Ethan reflected, the clearer the pattern became. Real wealth wasn't hiding from people. Our assumptions were hiding it. We had confused visibility with value for so long that the truth almost seemed invisible. Once that illusion disappeared, ordinary places began revealing extraordinary stories. A simple home could represent decades of wise decisions. An old car could represent years of financial independence, quietly protected from unnecessary debt. Suddenly, wealth wasn't something Ethan searched for in luxury. He searched for it in freedom, in ownership, in peace of mind, in the ability to choose without fear of tomorrow's bills. And perhaps that's the greatest misunderstanding of all. Wealth isn't always what other people can see. More often, it's what someone no longer has to worry about when no one else is watching. Maybe that's why it's so hard to recognize. We've trained ourselves to admire the symbols of wealth instead of the substance. We celebrate the spotlight while overlooking the quiet foundation holding everything together. So the next time you think someone looks wealthy, pause for just a moment. The greatest financial success may never be the lifestyle that demands your attention, but the freedom that never needed it in the first place.